A warm welcome to all the participants for the webinar on rehabilitation of Parkinson's using functional approach by Dr. Arunachalam, organized by Sri Samraj Physiotherapy Center, Dindivanam, Fitness and Rehab India YouTube channel, exercise testing and prescription website exrxindia.org, Pickle Studio, Chennai, in association with Dr. Arunachalam's Sai Ram Academy. Dr. Arunachalam is a teacher in the professional field for past 13 years, and he is working now as a professor and principal in Madhav College of Physiotherapy, Rajasthan. I welcome Dr. Arunachalam to carry on the session. Over to Dr. Arunachalam now.
Thank you, Dr. Chandramohan sir. It was always kind as being associated with you. After a very long time, we are being associated, though we are in connection. This is the first association. I hope this is going to be a grand success. I also thank Dr. Rupesh, Dr. Duna Saha for arranging this program and all the academies which are associated with this program. So without wasting much time, I would like to go into the topic. So the main aim of this topic was we wanted to deviate from stroke rehabilitation, first of all. Next thing is Parkinsonism is the second most commonest condition, neurological condition, which is faced by most of the developing countries and the developed countries. The first being dementia. So Parkinsonism, we always know what are the cardinal signs, what are the clinical features. So we'll be seeing these four important topics today. First is what are the known and less known factors of Parkinsonism. Known, I will leave it to you. You can. It is available everywhere. Very less known from research what is available for Parkinsonism. I'll tell you. What is functional approach, first of all. Then what are the motor learning challenges which are very particular to Parkinsonism, where physiotherapists have to be very cautious. And what are the technology that can be used in treatment of Parkinson's disease? In a nutshell, we'll see all those four things. So briefly, I'll tell you Parkinsonism, as we all know, is a problem of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And then there are four cardinal signs: tremor, bradykinesia or akinesia, postural instability, and rigidity. So these are very common things what we know. So the thing which is very less known there are two pathways in the brain, which is called the direct pathway and the indirect pathway, which is very important for resultant of movement. So forget about Parkinsonism. Now you think what is a normal strategy. There are three organs here: motor cortex, basal ganglia, the thalamus. I think I'm visible to all. So these three things, how they are connected with each other. The green line signifies there is an excitatory mechanism. The red line says that it is an inhibitory mechanism. So the motor cortex sends information to the basal ganglia, and that is an excitatory mechanism. If the basal ganglia sends information to the thalamus, then that is inhibitory mechanism. That is, it is connected. When basal ganglia sends more signal to thalamus, that means it is going to reduce the thalamus activity. If basal ganglia is not going to send any information to thalamus, it is going to increase the thalamus activity. That is what we have to know. And the thalamus sends an excitatory input to the motor cortex. This relationship should be very clearly known for everyone to understand what is a direct pathway and what is indirect pathway. Okay, so now there are two pathways, as I told you. This direct pathway, if it is activated, see, this direct pathway is activated means it will reduce this inhibitory activity. This red color is going to be this is not going to happen. There is no signal going from basal ganglia to the thalamus. So invariably what happens? The thalamus will send more impulse to the motor cortex. So more movements are going to take place. Whereas if the indirect pathway is activated, the basal ganglia starts sending more signals to the thalamus. So more it sends, it inhibits the output of the thalamus and less movement is going to take place. So without confusing, I can tell you that if the direct pathway is activated, more movements will take place. And if the indirect pathway is activated, less movements will be taking place. Sir, why there should be a need for a more movement and less movement? For example, if I want to grasp a bottle of water, I just take my hand forwards and take a bottle of water. My upper limb muscles should contract, whereas the other muscles should relax. Am I right or not? There should not be any movements in the other muscles. So what happens? The direct pathway for the upper limb is activated, whereas the other areas, muscles, the indirect pathway is activated so that the movements do not take place. So because of this only, this the circuitry mechanism of the brain is so complex. Which is the neurotransmitter responsible for both this activity? That is dopamine. Dopamine is present in the direct pathway as well as it is present in the indirect pathway. Okay, when the dopamine is secreted, it increases the activity of the direct pathway, whereas it decreases the activity of the indirect pathways. So invariably, dopamine is very essential for our movement. Okay, so you might be seeing a Parkinson's patient coming to your clinic very chronic. No patients come to your clinic at the early stage. That is because the symptoms start showing only after 80% of the dopamine is gone out of the patient's body. I'll tell you one story. A patient came to my clinic in 2012. He came with complaints of shoulder pain. I assessed him completely for shoulder pain. He was having reduced range of motion. He was having pain. I assessed him completely and I told him that, sir, your shoulder pain is a minor issue. I think you are starting with some Parkinson's symptoms. Your face is becoming slightly rigid, mask-like face you are having. You are not able to make more noise by means of a vocal cord rigidity, and your shoulder is showing lot of rigidity in movement, and there is a lot of reduced range of motion, and your tone is absent, and all these things I tried to explain to the patient. The patient said, no, I don't have any problem with Parkinsonism and all. I have only shoulder pain. So he left the clinic and he didn't turn back, to my surprise, and I was feeling bad that he didn't understand what I was trying to tell him. But after 8 years, in 2019, this same patient came to me. He's a police inspector. He came to me and he said, I am suffering with Parkinsonism. I was recently diagnosed. I was very curious to know, doctor, how did you diagnose that I have Parkinsonism 8 years before, when all the doctors were not able to find that I was having Parkinsonism all these years? Now only I started with Syndopa and dopamine tablets. So I told him the physical examination is the one which is more important. Um, so why I'm trying to tell this story is, most of the patients try to live with the problem what they are having and they get used to that. So the dopamine reduction will be so gradual so that the patients will not show up that they have some problem to some other people, or they themselves will not know. The second important thing is they'll think that is because of aging. Okay. So at the point of time they go and reach a doctor, they might have lost 80% of the dopamine, dopaminergic neurons, which produces dopamine. This is a very important statistic. So early diagnosis of Parkinsonism is very important. If you diagnose Parkinsonism early, there are studies which states that the quality of life is good for at least 15 years, which is by far high for most of the Parkinson patient. And for a physiotherapist, we are always concerned with movement. We are always concerned with movement, balance, gait, whereas Parkinsonism is concerned. But I'll tell you, there are a lot of things which are beyond the movement symptoms, that is non-motor symptoms. The first and foremost is the autonomic dysfunction. The autonomic system, as you know, comprises of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. This is responsible for all our autonomic functions. For example, if you go and see a Parkinson patient, he will be having greasy skin. Have you ever seen patients with greasy skin? That's because their sebaceous glands are over secreting. You will see patients with loss of hair on the body. You will see patients getting up and they'll be getting giddiness. That is because the autonomic dysfunction, where the blood do not go against the gravity because there is no vasoconstriction happening in the lower limb muscles. So all these autonomic functions are also lost. So that also should be considered. Next is the cognitive. The cognitive function is very important. The memory and the attention, these two are very important thing. You will be teaching patients for some exercise, he'll be concentrating somewhere else. So you should know how much the patient is giving attention to you and what is the attention span of a patient. Okay, and the cognitive function, as I said, memory. You will teach some exercises today, next day he will forget it. So these two things also have to be taken into account, and the physiotherapist should come out with some strategy to counter this problem. Otherwise, he'll be daily going, he'll be daily giving physiotherapy, but no use. Patient will be deteriorating because Parkinsonism is a gradually deteriorating disorder. Next is the neurobehavioral abnormalities. Very important neurobehavioral abnormality is introvertedness and depression. They will go to depression and they will isolate themselves from the family as well as from the society in particular. So in the ICF classification, this is going to be very important because if they isolate from the society, then the social participation is going to be a major problem for them. Okay, in a biopsychosocial model of disease, there is a biological problem for the patient which is felt psychologically. The patient is feeling some emotional problems with this biological disorder, and that reflects socially. I'm not able to take care of my grandson, I'm not able to go out for shopping. All these problems will again mount on the biological issue, and the patient's deterioration is going to be more. So cognitive aspects also physiotherapists should look into. Next is the sleep disorder. Sleep is very essential for every organism to prevent aging. Okay, so a person who sleeps nicely for more than 7 hours, they say that that is the best detoxifying effort he can do, and reducing his body aging because the cells of the body gets a lot of. But in case of the Parkinsonism, if they are not going to sleep, already they are aging fast. If they are not going to sleep for a long time, they are going to age even more faster. That is what research is saying. The REM sleep, the random eyeball movement sleep, is the major culprit in sleep disorders of Parkinson patients. Okay. So, as we read in our undergraduation, it is not only the dopamine which is causing the problem. Nowadays, the researchers are coming up with many problem with the acetylcholine, non-adrenergic cells, glutamine, which is a very important neurotransmitter, that is also getting reduced. GABA receptors are also getting reduced. So, Parkinsonism is not only a problem of dopamine, but it is also a problem of other neurotransmitters. That you should remember. That is why the patients are getting all other symptoms of autonomic nervous system, sleep disorders, because if you see, GABA is very essential for sleep. The glutamine is very essential for a feeling of well-being feeling. So all these things are affected. So the symptoms are also getting magnified. Not only the basal ganglia, but also the limbic system is affected. So limbic system is a very important system. Maybe that is a friend for a physiotherapist also because that helps in the placebo effect. Whatever treatment you give for patients, most of them get clicked. How? Because of the placebo, the emotion that is attached with it. There are physiotherapists, good physiotherapists, but I'm saying the other physiotherapists who have very good mouth, but they don't have any technique. They keep speaking to the patient, and the patient becomes normal. How many of you have seen the patient therapist like that? I have seen an n number of therapists. How do they succeed? That is because of this amygdala, which is present in your brain, which is very essential for the emotional attachment. If you see a person, you cry, you become very emotionally attached. In South India, we see Rajinikanth and we become emotionally attached with him because that is the limbic influence what he has given us. This limbic system is the one which moves your body. Moves means M for movement and motivation. And V is very essential for volitional activity and E for emotional activity. So movement, volition and emotion are the role of the limbic system. So there are studies which states that basal ganglia is not only affected in Parkinsonism. In later stages, the limbic system is also going to be affected. And in when I was studying college, my teacher used to say, assess a patient. If I go and tell the my teacher that the patient is Parkinsonism, and I say he has some tactile sensation loss, then immediately he'll ask me, Parkinsonism is a motor disorder. How do you expect sensory loss in this patient? Then this is not Parkinsonism. This is something else, and he will fail me. But now it is proved that there are a lot of proprioception being lost and tactile sensation being lost. Why this is happening? Because the patients do not utilize these sensation for their activities. So use it or lose it, same thing. Okay, so these people are not using the proprioception and tactile sensation, so the brain's ability to perceive that is coming down. Okay, so they are losing proprioception and the superficial sensation. So this is a very important chart you have to see. You have seen Parkinsonism patients without tremor. If they are without tremor, you should feel happy or not. Basically, I'll not feel happy because these 30% of the people who do not show tremor as their initial symptoms will deteriorate very badly. They will gradually deteriorate. So, my dear therapist, be careful that if the tremor is there, you should feel happy for your patients, because this tremor is going to give a warm up to the muscles. When the patient is resting, this tremor will always keep the muscle in a excited state, and this helps the patient in moving. Okay, if this tremor is not going to be there, the muscle has to start from zero. So as we know, the Parkinson's tremor is a resting tremor. It will not persist when the patient is moving. Whereas cerebellar tremor or intentional tremor, they will not be there in resting position. They will come only when the patient is trying to move their limb. Okay, so resting tremors are always good. Now, in your physiotherapy management, please don't write, I'm going to reduce tremor. You cannot reduce tremor. Okay, so why I don't want to reduce tremor? It is just a cosmetic problem that is not going to affect my functional activity. So anything and everything that is not going to affect my functional activity, I am not going to give any attention to that. Okay, so resting tremor, if they present in your patients, then that means they are going to progress gradually. So the impairment in memory, attention, and executive. What is executive function? Judgment making. This judgment making is absent in patients because now, first of all, the role of basal ganglia is to select movements. Okay, select movements means if you are seeing your friend after a long time, what reaction you are going to give to your friend, whether you're going to smile at him, or you're going to run and hug him, or you're going to give him a tight slap. All these things are determined by the basal ganglia. Okay, the basal ganglia is the one who is going to select the movement strategy. So when you're going on the road, some obstacle is coming in between. What we normally do, we either stop and let the obstacle go away, or we will give space for the obstacle to pass us, or we will stop the obstacle if it is of less velocity. So these are all the different strategies we adopt to social ambulation. But Parkinsonism patient will not have this executive function. They cannot avoid any obstacle. They will take a lot of time to decide which strategy to select. And finally, they will not take any strategy, or they will take a wrong strategy. So they tend to fall. So two major important problems Parkinsonism has is, first is gait abnormality, second is postural instability. These two things leads to fall. Fall are the very important events that happens in the patient's life, which will halt the rehabilitation or take them back in the rehabilitation phase and make them deteriorated. And also this will invest a fear of fall in their mind. Already the movement is very less. Imagine if I ask you to walk on um, a small stretch of place. Okay, so you will walk very easily. If the same small stretch of place is on the 15th floor, how you will walk? Your movements will be reduced. You will walk with less steps, less step length and stride length, and you will try to hold on to objects which are nearby. Am I right or not? Because that is a fear of fall. So the fear of fall is a normal tendency, but that tendency is more in Parkinson's patients who have already less movement. What happens because of this? The movement will be further reduced. Okay. So now I have told you all these problems. Now you will be thinking, so he's mounting a lot of problems, how to manage this. Okay. So now forget about Parkinsonism. Whatever we talked about Parkinsonism, just keep it one side. Now what we are going to see is functional approach. What is functional approach? Okay. So this is a very fancy term. People are always using functional rehabilitation, task-oriented approach, that, this, and everything. Normal passive movements should not be given, should not give monoplanar movements. All these things are because of functional approach. So we have to see what is functional approach says. So for knowing functional approach, you should know first of all, what is motor control. So when I say motor control, why that is essential for a physiotherapist? Okay, um, you are having a very good television set, okay, which is not working recently. I'm giving you all the gadgets which is used for repairing a television. I'm giving you the most sophisticated equipments in the world, the technology and everything I'm giving you. I'm giving you a nice space to work out. And what you will do, can you repair the television? No, you cannot repair the television because you don't know how that functions, first of all. If you know how it functions, then only you can make it all right. So when a physiotherapist is called as a movement scientist, he should know how the movement takes place, first of all. So motor control is very important. You should know as a physiotherapist how the movement takes place in your body. Next, what you have to know is the movement is nothing but it's an interaction between the task, the environment, and very importantly, the individual who is performing the movement. So how based upon the task your movement differs? I want to take a tumbler of water and drink. Okay. So this task is invariably same for everywhere, you can say. But if the tumbler is on my table, it is very easy for me to take the water and drink. In case if the tumbler is far away from my body, the strategy I adopt to, in case if the glass of water is inside the fridge, the is different. So when you say that the patient is able to drink a glass of water, then from where he is able to drink, whether it is nearby him or whether it is in the refrigerator or which is far away. So the task determines what movement the patient is going to adopt. And the environment, very importantly, walking on a level ground is different, walking on a ramp is different, walking on a sand, beach sand is different. So the environment will also make you adopt different um, strategies of movement, and individual differences will be there. Okay, if a beautiful girl comes and pinches my cheek, how I will respond? If some other stranger comes and pinches my cheek, how I will respond? I will respond differently for different individuals. So um, uh, it depends upon yeah, how I respond and how Chandramohan sir respond. Maybe he'll give the same response to both the people, but I will enjoy the girl coming and pinching my cheek. So individual also matters. So movement is dependent on the environment, the task, and the individual. This is very important. So when you are training a patient, you should give him a variety of tasks, you should give him a variety of environment, and you should give respect to his strategy, what he was adopting before. Next important thing you should know is motor learning. This learning is a very, very important thing for physiotherapists because we go and see a patient for 45 minutes to 1 hour. Am I right? So in that we'll incorporate all the techniques what we know in our life, and how many repetitions you give for one particular technique. Maybe if I say you're going to train sit to stand, how many times you train a patient? Hardly 10 times you will train, hardly 20 times you will train. You should know whether that is sufficient for the learning to take place. We ask the students to read something repeatedly for the learning to take place, right? For example, I'll give you, when you're trying to learn driving a car, you will know that there is a steering is there, you know, the ABC is there, your seat positioning and everything, where to look into the mirrors and all these things you will be knowing. And initially when you are driving, you will be very cautious, you will be seeing all these things, you will be making mistakes, and that is the cognitive phase. It is the phase where you are understanding what is what are the things which are around. And the next phase, after sometimes if you keep learning to drive, what happens? The stage of acquisition, where You will know what is what. You will be driving nicely. The amount of errors will come down. You will feel much more relaxed, but your concentration will always be focused on the road and the vehicle. The last stage of automation, where you have mastered the technique, there you will not be looking into the gear or the steering. Instead, you will be talking to your friend or somebody on the phone, and you'll be driving automatically. So the learning has happened so much that this movement, which was very difficult for you to do, has become so automated, and you do without any error, without much of concentration towards that. So this is how a movement should happen in stroke patients and in the neurological patients also, when they are trying to relearn or learn new things. You should repeat it often and often and often so that it becomes automated for them. There is no point in giving any repetition 10 times a day and going next day with 10 times, because already the Parkinson's patient's memory is very less. So if you are going to give an exercise for 10 times every day, that is not going to influence him at all. Let it be. You're going to train one full session of sit to stand. Let it be. Let it be. No issues. You are not going to give any passive movements for the upper limb and lower limb. Let it be. This is going to give a significant result in sit to stand activity of the patients, which is very functionally important. Okay, that is more important. Give due consideration to learning. Next, very important thing is the available evidence. What this evidence says. What is meant by evidence? The research accumulated information. The research will be telling you do this, do that, don't do this. For this class also, how do I came about this functional idea is, I have referred lot of journals. These journals always give me an idea what to do and what not to do. So I will always go to research to have my doubts cleared. So you have to compare these knowledge with what research says. And finally, the abilities of your patient. Don't try to show everything you know on your patient who is less able. Okay, I just know this word less able. I'm not saying disabled, who are less abled, because that might be too much for that patient. Second thing is, don't underestimate the patient's abilities. The patient might be able to do more than what you expect from him. Okay, you will be starting up with gradual active range of motion exercises, but the patient might be more ability have more ability to do close kinematic chain exercises, and he'll be able to do more athletic exercises. So always know what is the patient's ability. I always use this one particular question to the patient to know what is their ability. Sir, what do you expect from this course of physiotherapy? I'll ask all my patients. So they will have some set of expectations which is very realistic and which is very true and which is more needed for them. Okay, so if my patient says, sir, I have problem in toileting activity, I have problem in taking care of my grooming activities, then that will be my first priority when I am treating the patient. Okay, so what are the expectations of the patients and abilities of the patient? You have to give due consideration to that. If it is not really not realistic, then you can just explain to the patient that that is not realistic. But most of these ideas, what the patient says, will be realistic. Otherwise they will not say. They themselves will say, sir, I really don't want to do some acrobatic things. I really want to take care of my daily activities. As a physiotherapist, you might have heard this thing very often. Okay, so these things, if you know, then you can do a functional approach very fantastically. Motor control, motor learning, evidences, and then giving due respect to the patient's abilities. Okay, next is to perform an task oriented approach. What are the very important things here? Task oriented approach should focus on goal directed functions, which is done actively and which is done repeatedly. Okay, this is very important thing. Why I have underlined this actively as red color is, many of we people, I include myself also, in the early stages we will do passive movements. We will do passive movements, passive stretching for Parkinsonism patients. Giving one or two passive range of motions and stretching will really help. They will help in relaxing the muscle, warming up the muscle, but that is not going to realistically bring about any elongation of the muscle. Um, you can go and read a lot of research which says that the passive stretching which physiotherapists perform on patients do not result in any length change in the patient on a long term. Maybe that will increase the flexibility for 2 or 3 minutes. After that, this fades away. So I'm not saying stretching is not effective therapy, but in case of a neurological problem, because of a upper motor neuron lesion, if the muscles are shortened, then if you're going to stretch the muscle and say that I have stretched the muscle and it is going to be normal, next day you come and see the same thing will be there. The patient will not show any changes. So don't adopt any passive techniques unless otherwise it is very essential. If the patient is losing range of motion in the shoulder, if he's not able to do active range of motion, if you want to preserve the range of motion, then you can do 3 or 4 range of motions per day for each and every joint, which is more than sufficient. Just reach the end range of the movement and come back. That will preserve the range of motion of the patient. But don't sit along with the patient like playing a harmonium and do passive range of motion for shoulder flexion 10 times, abduction 10 times, internal rotation 10 times. This may increase the time of treatment, but you're not going to do any good things to the patients. Okay. And when I say it should be goal directed, that means the patient should have used it or he wants it in future. So that is called as the goal directed. For example, if you are asking a patient to reach up to the ceiling and come back, like doing the movement flexion and up extension, instead of that, ask him to take a bottle of water and keep it on the loft, or ask him to take a book from the loft and keep it on the table. So you can mimic movements which are similar to normal movement pattern, which are functional and which are purposeful. So the important thing in this slide, what we are seeing is you have to give a goal directed activity and you have to give active. And the third important thing is you have to repeat it, not 1 or 2 times, maybe 30, 40 times. In Parkinsonism, it should be more than the other neurological patients because their memory is affected and there is no sensory, there are a lot of sensory problems and emotional problems in this. So give them more amount of repetitions. Give active movements, not passive techniques. Give functional and goal directed activities. And third important thing is repeat it as much as possible. Second thing is, I have seen a lot of if you go to internet and see in YouTube, um, Parkinson's rehabilitation, they'll put these old age people onto Swiss ball. They will make them walk upside down. They will ask them to do sporting activities, band exercise, TheraBand exercise, and they will ask them to stand on a trampoline. So are they going to do all these activities? You tell me, old age person of 60 years in Indian community, is he going to sit on a Swiss ball and stand in future? That is what we are going to train them for? No, that is absolutely not. For the sake of treatment, to show off that you have a Swiss ball, to say that it's an advanced therapy, there is no need of advanced therapy for Parkinson patient. Whatever we give, if it is beneficial to the patient, then that is the advanced, not whatever you have you are applying on patients. Okay, why I'm saying this, sit to stand training from a Swiss ball may not help patients. See, this guy is doing two unstabilizing things on the foot, sitting on a Swiss ball. When he's going to do this in his real life, you tell me. Instead of this, if you can train a patient to sit to stand from a toilet, that is really going to help the patient. You know, normal chair height is more than the toilet height. If you are training a patient in a chair for sit to stand and stand to sit activity, and you're going to tell the patient that this is sufficient for you to do toileting activities, you can carry on, means he will find it very difficult, because the chair is entirely different from a western commode. It is going to have a hole in between, it is low in height, it is going to have mosaics around, there is no place to grasp, it doesn't have a handrails to support. So that is going to be very tough. So instead of wasting your time in all these things, do some meaningful and solve the purposes, that is problem will be there for the patients in sit to stand, in toileting activities. Try to solve those problems. So meaningful activities should be adopted. I think I'm making sense here. Next thing is attesting impairments, then the activity. Okay, sir, this is a thing which is there in the MRP. MRP says that if you have problem in sit to stand, I have to analyze which is the muscle that is causing the problem. Mostly the hip extensors and the knee extensors will be the culprit. So what MRP says, you have to train these muscles separately. You have to train the quadriceps muscle, and you have to train the hip extensors separately, and then incorporate that in sit to stand. Expect that these muscles will work better than before. Am I right or not? This is biomechanical approach. You can attest to the impairments in this way. You can train your quadriceps separately in case if it is a stroke patient. But in case of a Parkinson's patient, there won't be such problems. There won't be any missing components at all. There won't be any individual muscle weakness at all. So attesting to the impairment level problems, no, that is not going to help in case of a Parkinson's patient, because in Parkinson's patient, if you see, the dynamic balance will be good, but the static balance will not be good, which is in reverse of development. Normally, how what we say, uh, mm, s- um, individual in the neurodevelopmental sequence first develops static balance, then he develops dynamic balance. Am I right or not? We learn to stand first, and then we learn to walk as a toddler. But in Parkinson's patient, if you see, if you ask them to stand in a place for a long time, they tend to perturbate front and back. Whereas if you ask them to walk, they will walk nicely. Patients may stand better but sit poor. From sitting to standing, they will be sit. They'll do a better sit to stand. But standing to sitting, they may not be able to do. Whereas for me, if someone asks me to sit, I'll be comfortably sitting. If someone asks me to stand up, I'll feel lazy. I'll feel very tough to stand because I'll have pain, because it's against gravity activity, and that is a towards gravity activity. But these patients, they will easily sit to stand, but if you ask them to stand to sit, they'll fall backwards. And I have seen patients who have a very good, very poor quadriceps activity, but they'll do sit to stand activity. Imagine how without quadriceps you will do sit to stand. But that is what beauty of the Parkinsonism is all about. When they are activating an individual muscle, they may not be able to do, but they are, when they are doing a mass movement where they are going to contract more muscles together, this quadriceps will act. So you need not train individual muscles. That is what I'm trying to tell. If the patient is not able to sit to stand, please don't waste your time in training your quadriceps and your extensors of your hip, the maximus, and don't try that the patient will get up better. Always train what you want. You want to sit to stand, train sit to stand, and do it repeatedly. Repeatedly, the patient will learn it. Okay, that is what I'm trying to say. Next is consider environment and other contextual factors while you are practicing. Most often or not, we ask the patient to come to the clinic, or we go to the patient's house and we treat. How often we take a patient for a walk to the community? Very rare, very rare, because these patients have a lot of learning difficulties. Task which they try to learn in a closed atmosphere, they may not be able to reproduce in an open atmosphere. That is not, that is common for everybody. Every human being has this problem, but the Parkinsonism patients has it more. So when you train the patients to walk indoor, they may not be able to do this in a outdoor activity. Okay, the challenges in the outdoor activity is more. The environmental change, the walking surface changes, the background noise changes. Okay, many people will be walking along with the patients. So always when you're training these patients, take them to the community. Only when you leave the patient effective in the community, the rehabilitation gets completed. Not the hospital rehabilitation or the familial rehabilitation. It is the society level rehabilitation that finishes off the rehabilitation process for every patient. So Parkinsonism patient is a gradually deteriorating patient. So definitely your service is going to be there for throughout their lifestyle life. So the quality of life will always be better when you are doing community level rehabilitation. Next is always give feedbacks to the patient. It might be auditory feedback or a visual feedback. This is how this condition differs from stroke. In stroke, we say keep the feedbacks as low as possible, give more space for the patients to perform, encourage more voluntary activity, reduce the feedbacks when and there required. Gradually try to reduce the feedback and make the patient do individually without feedback. But as far as Parkinson patient is concerned, the feedbacks and cueing, that is auditory cueing and the visual cueing, is very important. Don't try to reduce this feedbacks unless otherwise you really feel the patient is safe. Okay, so feedbacks are very important. So when I say feedback, you have two things: implicit learning and explicit learning. These two things are very essential for a person to know. What is first we'll see what is explicit learning. So imagine when you have a coach to train your activity. Okay, he is giving you all the instruction about a game. He's telling you what are the rules and regulations of the game. He's asking you to play in a um, limited area initially, then he's transferring the skills to other areas. So that is called as explicit learning. Sorry. Yeah, somebody is teaching you, you are having a system of learning. You are first understanding what is what, and then you are slowly applying that on the field. Somebody is there to guide you, and he will always give you instructions to how to read and how not to read, how to play, and all these things. So that is called as explicit learning, when everything is explained to a person and he learns from the coach or some book material or from a video materials. He's learning and he's using it. So that is called as explicit learning. But what is implicit learning? Implicit learning is, I am taking a cycle, I am trying to drive the cycle, I am falling, getting up, again I am driving. With trial and error method, I know how to learn driving the cycle. That is called as implicit learning. So to be very simple, whatever I learned on my own, my son is doing in a different way. I had did implicit learning all these years. I came to know how to ride a cycle on my own. I was driving bike. I learned swimming on my own. Nobody taught me. Even for most of the people, nobody would have taught us. But now everything has become explicit. Now for swimming, you have classes. You will have theory classes, people telling how to swim, how to make your hands, what is backstrokes, what is front stroke, butterflies, and how to ride a car. Also, you have classes, sophisticated classes. So, in your opinion, which is good, which is bad? Which stays for a long time, which does not stay for a long time? Explicit learning is a very systematic learning, but it can evaporate very easily. But implicit learning is a very difficult way of learning, may take little more time, but it stays in your mind for a long time because it comes through experience. Your brain has more centers to record this implicit learning, whereas explicit learning, the centers which are involved for recording is very less. So when I say how this the informations are processed in your brain, for example, if I see my friend, I will relate her with her voice. First, I'll say, hey, your voice has changed a lot. Next thing is her appearance. You have become stout. Third thing is the way they move, the way they touch, the way they do many things. So all these things are very essential. I will remember a person by this thing only. If I have a grudge on some person who has scolded me before, when I see this person, when he starts speaking itself, this memory clicks. Okay, he has scolded me one day. Or when a person might have hit you on a day, that might be recorded in your pain centers, that will come back to you. So anything and everything in your day-to-day life is being recorded in different areas. Okay, that's why we say, um, I forgot you, but if I see you directly, I can understand who are you. I have forgot your voice. Many people we tell this in phone, right? Some people, if we see them, we will forget. We won't be able to recall who he is. But once he starts talking with his very husky voice, we can understand, okay, this is this guy. So memory retrieval is from various areas of the brain. So what I'm trying to say here is Parkinsonism patients do not have a good implicit learning. They cannot learn from their mistakes. They may not be, if you think that they will learn from their mistakes, that is not going to happen. But their explicit learning is preserved. So what you have to do, you have to give a structured exercise, a structured instruction to the patient that when you're walking, you may feel these disturbances. When somebody is talking to you, don't give your attention to them. You may fall. Often you are falling forwards. Because of that, you're getting injury to your frontal lobe. And always try to maintain an erect posture. All these informations you have to keep on giving to the patient because their implicit learning is less. So when you're introducing a new atmosphere, new task for them, first you have to explain everything. If possible, you can demonstrate to them. Okay, so these two learning types are very essential. Next is your feedback mechanism. There are two types of feedback mechanism: feed forward and feedback mechanism. So when I tell you this thing, what is meant by feed forward is, if I tell patient, sir, I'm going to push you from forwards. So you have to maintain an erect posture and you should not lose your balance. Okay. I'll be giving a reasonably good force so that you should maintain yourself. So I am giving this information to the patient and I am studying the, what is that? The system to be ready for some perturbation. Yeah, this is the one. Okay. The system is prepared before the command or the sensory input is given. After studying the system, I am giving the command to sensory input. That is, I am pushing the patient, and the patient is responding by means of his limb movements or by his body posturing, and the movement output takes place. This is called as feed forward mechanism, where I am giving all the inputs before, and the patient's system gets ready itself for the incoming sensory input. The next thing is feed forward mechanism. Here also we are going to tell the patient that I am going to do this, and then we are going to give the sensory input. Limb movement and body posture is going to take place, and very importantly, in case if there is any fall, if the patient fall down, okay, he's going to fall down. That means the feedback is coming from the movement, from the joints, goes to the brain, and immediately the body tries to steady itself and rearranges itself in a stable posture. Okay, so feedback means I am not giving all the informations to the patient initially. I am saying that I will push you, but I will not tell him from which direction I'll push him. Okay, it is up to the patients to decide how to prevent fall from all the directions. Okay, I'll be pushing him front, from the sides, from the back. So this mechanism is called as feedback mechanism. So both these things have to be trained in a Parkinson's patient, but the feed forward mechanism is the one which works better for these patients. The feedback mechanism do not work well for this patient because they don't have proper implicit learning. Can you feel the connection between these two, feedback and feed forward? Implicit learning is learning from their mistakes, learning on their own, trial and error method. Okay, that is not going to work for Parkinson patients. So you cannot give any exercises with feedback mechanism. You always should give a feed forward mechanism. You have to give all the instructions and you have to make the system steady before you are giving the sensory. Okay, always give an good attention to the medication of the patients, because these levodopas and syndopas, what they are going to have is going to affect the dopamine alone. It is not going to affect their cholinergic or adrenergic or your GABA receptors or something like that. It is going to affect only the um, dopamine. So that means the dopamine is going to produce more movements. If they are going to take any medication in the form of a dopamine agonist, that is your syndopa, levodopa, that period after 2 hours or 1 hour of this medication, they will be having a very good movement. They can do much better movement than a normal person, on a normal circumstances. So physiotherapy should always be planned so that you give it somewhere 2 hours after the medication. This will maximize your treatment output. And you should know what are the patient's capacity, we have already said, what are the patient's interest, we have already said, and what are the needs of the patient, we have already mentioned. So giving consideration to all these things and doing a treatment is called as functional approach. But in Parkinson patient, you have a lot of learning problems. As I told you earlier, they may not be able to do that. So to maximize the benefits that may be achieved through exercise, the mechanism of learning affecting the Parkinson's disease needs to be understood. Treating all other neurological patients is different from treating a Parkinson's patient because they have learning difficulties. This we might have studied in patients where pediatric patients who have learning difficulties. So these Parkinson patients should also be treated as patients with learning difficulties. The strategy that best counters these difficulties be researched more. We have to keep researching on our clinical experience how to overcome these problems. So the common learning problems what patients have is they will be slow learners. They cannot learn it as fast as many people. You can see this problem. Your grandfathers and grandmothers, if you ask them to learn the smartphones, they'll find it very difficult. And apart from that, they'll also be annoyed in people who are using this smartphone because they don't know how to learn it. Okay, so this low rate of learning is a problem here, and they'll be even more slower than the age-related normals. Next, lack of realizations. Um, I have trained a patient with perturbation. I have given him perturbation. He's responding very beautifully. I'm living in a society. If somebody come and slightly hit him, he'll fall down. You should not go and ask your patient, sir, I have given you so much of perturbation training. You did very excellent in a closed ambience. But when you went to the society, somebody hit you slightly, you fell down and you landed up in the hospital. What is this? You cannot ask the patient because he doesn't know how to generalize. What is meant by generalizing? If I give you a tool, if you are able to use it in wherever it is needed, that is called as generalization of the tool. So these patients may not be able to generalize uh, the gains what they have got from your training. Next is difficulty in dual tasking. Dual tasking is you ask a patient to count when he is walking. Here you are giving a motor task and a cognitive task. Cognitive task is counting and motor task is walking. So these patients may not be able to do. So don't try to ask when the patient is walking, don't give him some task like, sir, no, just step onto that side, just step onto this side, sir, lift your hand like this. Please don't give him any dual tasking. If you give him a task, give all the informations before itself and ask him to do this activity. In between, if you are going to change the task, he may not be able to listen to you because his mind is focused only on the motor task. He cannot multitask at the same time. He's doing one task. Okay, so dual tasking should not be given in initial stages. Only when you train the patient for dual tasking, you can train these patient. You can translate the single task into dual task, and then to multitasking. So what is movement time and reaction time? Very important thing. I'll have a test for all of you people. I'm going to play a video which is going to tell how much is your reaction time and movement time. Reaction time, in fact. So whenever you are seeing a red color round, red color circle, you have to clap. Okay. Are you up to the challenge? You're going to clap whenever you are seeing a red color circle. Not a circle, red color circle. Yeah. Try. Also clap. You can clap with me. Whenever you're seeing a red circle, you can clap. How far, how sooner you are clapping, that matters, right? Not hearing sound from you. This is going to get even more interesting now. Clap now. Somebody is digitally clapping. Clap. So now somebody is doing it very nicely. Easy, right? You are doing it very easily. Now, stage 1 starts. Stage 2. I think this will wake you up also. It's not that harder, right? How many percentage of can do this? 40% of the people on earth can do this very easily without no problem. Stage 3 is going to be little tough. It's going to increase your reaction time. Since sir, you are doing a very good effort. Great. Okay, it was really hard, right?
No.
It was not hard. And that's good. 40% of these people can do this. The next stage, fourth stage. This is going to be even more tougher. Only 10% of the people in earth can do this activity. Okay. So fine, you can unmute all of them, sir. What we try to know is that what is called as a reaction time. So what is remember reaction time? The moment you see that red color circle, you are clapping, right? The time taken for you to perceive that that is a red circle and you have to clap, and the moment you start clapping, the movement starts, right? That is called as a reaction time. So when a Parkinson patient is walking on the road, some vehicle coming in between, he should know that some vehicle is coming in between. I will be hitting on it, and I have to take some efforts to get away from this. And if he is going to take that movement away from that object, until then, this is called as the reaction time. Okay, this is very important. And what is called as movement time? The moment you start clapping and you finishes the clap. So that is called as the movement time. If I ask you to clap 4 times very fast when you see a red circle, 1, 2, 3, 4, the moment you start clapping and end this clapping, that is called as the movement time. Now tell me, if this movement time and reaction time are more, means that's good or bad? That is going to be bad, because a small activity the patient is going to do for a long period of time. You give 2 objects for the patients to touch in between. Sir, you have to touch these 2 fingers of mine repeatedly as fast as possible. The patient will start fast, but slowly he will decay. The movement will decay. The dopamine will come down in his brain. His direct channels will run out of dopamine. Okay, so these are the problems the patient is going to face, this movement time and reaction time. So if you are going to give dumbbells and ask the patient to do strengthening exercise and expect these patients to perform well, that is not going to happen. Because as I told you, you have to understand what is the motor problem the patient is having. The patient's motor problem is movement time and reaction time. You have to give tasks which are going to improve this. Instead, don't give them more strengthening activities which is beyond their need. Okay, yes, any Parkinson patient have to lift somewhere around 2 kg or 3 kg in his daily activities, but beyond that, giving 5 kg, 10 kg and giving close kinematic push-ups and all, that is not going to be useful for the patients. Okay, so that is what I'm trying to tell with this thing. So what are the things you have to do? I have to give more of visual and auditory cueing for the patient. Next is more practice is needed for the patient. more feedbacks are more needed for the patient. I have to always give feedbacks for the patient, and feed forward also is very important. That is cueing. When you give an instruction to the patient before the starting of the activity, that is called as auditory and visual cueing. And during the activity, if you are giving, that is also cueing. And at the end of the activity, if you are giving, that is called as feedback. Am I clear? So you have to give more visual cueing as well as motor feedback. So we always say this thing as knowledge of performance and knowledge of activity. So when you are doing an activity, if you are saying, sir, you are not doing properly, you are spilling all the marbles down. When you ask a patient to change the marbles from one box to other box, if he's performing, you're saying, sir, you're spilling all the marbles down, do it properly, then that means you're giving a visual cueing about the action. Knowledge of performance. Knowledge of activity means how many pebbles he has changed from this to this. Sir, there was 100 pebbles here, you have transferred only 50 pebbles, remaining 50 pebbles you have dropped it down. So next time when you are doing, you have to do it better. So that is called as knowledge of activity. You have to give both knowledge of performance to the patient as well as the knowledge of activity to the patient. Then only the patient will improve his performance. Seek for patient attention. Very often this happens with the Parkinson patients. You will be teaching him something, he'll be looking at your face, but his mind will be somewhere else. His attention span is very, very, very less. So how to assess for an attention span of a patient? Tell him a story initially, maybe a story about you, how you became a physiotherapist, how your father pushed you into physiotherapy, and how you are struggling all these days to make yourself as a best physiotherapist. Tell him a story for somewhere around 20 minutes. And after that 20 minutes, ask him, if he's not having attention, he will say, I don't know how you became physiotherapist, how you are surviving, I don't know, like that. So in these patients, if you tell them that I'm going to ask you questions at the end of this session, they will definitely give attention to you. Sir, I'll be now for this session also, how to increase the attention. What Chandramohan sir has done, he said he will be asking 6 questions at the end of this session. If only you guys answer this 6 question, you will be getting the certificate. So because of that, at least people will be listening to this session. That is how we are increasing the attention span. Okay, so you have to take every activity to increase the attention span of the patient. Single task, then go for a dual task, and then go for multitask. We have discussed. Community ambulation and community movement is very essential. I recently read a study that in American Geriatric Society, they have come up with this study. What normally we give for our aged people in our society, if they go to a diabetologist or a general physician, what they will ask you first? Sir, are you doing exercise? He will say, yes sir, I am doing exercise daily. I am walking for 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers. So for Indian society, we prescribe this walking as a major exercise. But in abroad, they say most of the fall in geriatrics and Parkinson's patients happen when they go for a walk. So for us, everything is walking. If I walk for 4 hours a day, 4 kilometers per day, that is sufficient for me. I can maintain my fitness. But that is not true in case of a foreigner. He needs a variety of exercises. Walking alone is not an exercise. You have to incorporate aerobic and anaerobic exercises in your day-to-day activity. So walking is the not only prescribed exercise, the loud and clear information to your patients hereafter you have to tell. Any patients, if you are asking, sir, are you doing exercise? If he says, I walk for 30 minutes, then you tell, walk 30 minutes per day, at least 3 times a week, more than sufficient. Okay, remaining days you modify some other activity. It might be a sports or a dumbbell activity. And there is also a myth in Indian society that aged people will not lift dumbbells. If you give them dumbbell activity, they'll say, sir, at this age, how can I do dumbbells? What is the big deal? You have to break that myth. You have to give them 1 or 2 kg dumbbells to do anaerobic exercises also. When I say dumbbells, should not give them more weights, because over strengthening, when you try to strengthen too much, you're wasting your dopamine in the patients. Okay. Dopamine also helps in increasing the strength of contraction. So when you're going to give a very strong contraction to the patients, that is going to be waste of time for you. Next is, I'm going to give you a small video. You see, your brain is highly interconnected with each other. The one which is on the brainstem is the called as the archicerebellum. Archicerebrum, that is the oldest part, neocerebrum and paleocerebellum. These three things are there. This oldest form, that is the archicerebrum, is the one which is used for our day-to-day activities like breathing, sleeping, biological clock, all those things. Okay, so if you go beyond this, if you see, there are some more brain centers in your which are called as the subcortical structures. Very important subcortical structure out of that is the limbic system, and among this limbic system, the most important thing is your amygdala. This amygdala is which is located in the centermost part of your brain. Okay, so this center is very essential for fear. He is going to give you a lot of fear. There is a lot of connection between amygdala and Parkinson patient, I'll tell you. But you might be seeing in your normal walks of life, individual differs from one to other. How they differ? Some of them do have fear. Some of them don't have fear. I have wondered seeing people who are in the army, who risk their life and go for battle every day very happily. How do they don't have this fear? Because they have trained for this amygdala. Even among ourselves, we will see some person will be jumping from height very nicely. If they go to the height, they don't have that fear. But some people, they don't know how to stand on a top. They will be very afraid. So this fear factor is the one which is associated with amygdala. The amygdala controls the fear factor. So the American army, what they did was they started training their soldiers for this particular amygdala. They wanted to train the amygdala because in their training session, if they saw, they are training 100 soldiers, they are training them equally well, but only 30 to 35% of them comes as a soldier who goes to the battlefield. If they saw how this is happening, why most of them are not passing the tests and coming as a soldiers in the field, that means their neuroscience has a significant say. When they approached the neuroscientists, they said, you have to train the amygdala. How you can train the amygdala? You have to give the real life experience, the battle like experience for them. Then only the fear will slowly go away. More they get used to it, this fear factor goes off. I used to wonder in my 5 to 10 years before, how people are driving cars, how they're driving on the highways so fast, so beautifully they are driving. I am afraid, I think I cannot drive car in my life like this. But once I started driving car, initially I drove for 20 kilometer speed, 40 kilometer speed, 100 kilometer speed. Now if I go for 100 kilometer speed, I feel I am so very slow. So I increase my acceleration to 140 and I'm able to do that without any fear. Now I talk to my family members and everything goes on very beautifully because my amygdala is being clearly trained because I drove car. Instead of this, if I know everything about car driving, I see every day on the video how a person is driving a car. And if I go and sit into the car, will I be able to drive the car? No, I won't be able to drive the car because this real life scenario always gives very good learning. That is implicit learning for that. So what this American Navy people did was, to train these people, they gave a typical type of training which will mimic the battlefield. Okay, for that what they did, they kept them in a closed room. They shut their ears and they shut their eyes. Okay, they gave a mask like thing. That will be showing in this. See, once this mask goes away, they'll be put into real life scenario. Okay, this panic button is there in the amygdala. So now the mask is removed. He doesn't know what is going to come for him. Okay, suddenly it is removed. Some people are coming and attacking him. Okay, so now again it is closed. This is the training what they give. And it is very importantly, not always they'll give them this fighting attitude. Sometimes once it is open, people will come and ask them, see, now he's giving a scenario where he's shooting people. He has to shoot his enemies. People who are having hands up, he should not shoot them. So he's, the next scenario is somebody is coming and asking him which way to go, so he's going to guide him. So like that, they are going to give a real life scenario. So this helped him a lot. See, he should not shoot that person who is going for a hands up position. So this sort of real life scenario, they have trained the soldiers. This has resulted in a significant difference in these patients, in these soldiers, and the passing rate for these people who underwent this particular type of training was high. So you can relate this with Parkinsonism now. I need not tell you. You give them a real life situation. You go to their house. For example, if a Parkinson patient is a librarian, you ask him, you give him 10 sets of books, ask him to arrange it on the concerned racks how he normally used to arrange. Okay, so then he will be able to do this. Give them the real life experience, ask them to perform whatever movements they are not able to perform, and try to give them feedbacks. So this is very important. Okay, you can make it very interesting also. And the last important thing I want to tell you is come up with some technology. The technology is fast. If you are not getting yourself associated with a technical person, or to lose many things as a physiotherapist, you cannot hang on with this IFT's ultrasound for a longer period of time. And you see, after this corona, we have learned how to use this media to be attend webinars. Before this, have you ever attended? No, you have not attended. Most of them have not attended. So the necessity is the mother of invention. So the necessity has come to physiotherapy where you have to update yourself with technology. Okay, so now you can see this virtual reality. A Parkinson patient who is finding it very difficult to walk on normal grounds is being tied with jacket, which is going to help her in stabilizing herself, and she is walking on a treadmill. So she is not walking with the normal environment. She is walking in a virtual environment. She is having a treadmill, and she has to use one hand to tap the obstacles which are coming in between. Okay, she has two different walking surface. This can incline and it can decline. And now they have switched on the lights, and she is really into this environment, and she is being motivated to walk, and she has various heights and lows. When she is climbing, this treadmill will be height. When she is coming down, it will be declined. And there will be wild animals coming on her way, and she has to do this. She, at the same time, she'll maintain a fast walking. She has to maintain her posture and everything. And now you see, she has gone into a new world. Okay, they go into a new world and they get motivated to do this thing. And this sort of virtual reality will help you. There are patients in with Parkinson's who find it very difficult to walk. They'll walk with the very small steps. So what we normally educate these patients to do is to increase their stepping length. But you cannot increase the stepping length just like that. You have to give some markings on the floor. You can say, sir, you have to step onto the markings and you have to increase your step length and walk. But when they are going to an office space, or when they are going to some community, how they do this? They may not be able to do that. So for them, a person who was working with NASA has found out a virtual reality glass, which when they wear, the surface, the one they are seeing, that is a walking path, will be divided like a chess box. So this chess box, the patient has to put their feet on the black boxes and walk, and the black box will be designed in such a way that the step length will be maintained correctly. So these are all innovations what we have to accept in our day-to-day life to improve the quality of living of the patients. So exercise, what it will do in Parkinson patient, I'll finally sum up. It will increase the motor functions. It will increase the neurotrophic factors, that is increase the amount of neurotransmitters in your brain. It will increase the plasticity of your brain. It is reduce the inflammation that is happening in the neural tissues, so that it is going to reduce your aging process of the nervous system. It is going to reduce the oxidative stress, thereby it will be easily removing the free radicals and reduce the production of free radicals, so that you are going to be stable for a long period of time. It is going to increase the dopamine and other neurotransmitters in your body. Okay, and it is going to maintain a homeostasis between all other neurotransmitters in your body, and it is also going to improve the cognitive function. More you move the patient, more confidence the patient is going to get, and more feel of good feel well-being is going to come. So that is going to increase the quality of life of this patient. So this word I always tell or to all my patients and my students: physiotherapist is an effective team member. There is no doubt in that. In a rehabilitation, he is a very good team member, and effective only when he is part of a team. You cannot manage everything on your own. You have to depend on some other people like occupation therapist, speech therapist, physiatrist, and all these people for bringing about a betterment in a patient. So always work as a team. Then only the physiotherapist will become super effective. Thank you so much. And I thank thank for the opportunity, because every classes I'll see as an opportunity to reach out to my physiotherapist and to my students. And in that way, this is really a good opportunity given to me by the academies which are associated and by Chandramohan sir. Now it is open for discussion for questions.
Those who are having any doubts, you can unmute and you can ask the person. Otherwise, type the doubt. He will read it and he will answer.
Good evening, sir.
Very
So
good
my
evening.
question, what according to you should be the long-term management of a Parkinson's patient?
Yeah, very importantly, you should know when you say long term, what is the current situation of the patient. You should have a scale like a Hohmann Yahr scale to grade the patient's current abilities. And as a physiotherapist, as time passes, you will be able to know what is the longevity of this patient, how is the quality of life. Because when you see a patient with Hohmann Yahr scale grade 4 or 3 and above, it is very tough for you to rehabilitate these patients, because almost all the dopaminergic neurons would have gone by that time when they come to you for physical activity. In case if they are used to some physical activity and they are coming to you because they have shifted their location or something like that, then that is easy for you to treat. But the current position will determine how long the patient will have a good quality of life and how to maintain the quality of life. But one thing is very sure, they'll need physiotherapy throughout their life. So you should use some scales to rate the current situation. From there on, you have to take it stage by stage, how the patient progresses, how long the patient takes for progressing from stage 1 to stage 2 in Hohmann Yahr scale, and how much it takes for 2 to 3. If the patient is already in 3, you should know the history of the patient. From the history, you can know how many years it has taken for the patient to come from 1 to 2. Okay, so apply some scales and know what is a long-term strategy you're going to adopt.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah.
I have one question.
Yes, please.
Okay, so whenever we see a patient, especially geriatric patient and definitely a Parkinson's patient, the patient himself or his family members, they keep on asking about the prognosis. So what is the best way to deal and answer this kind of question?
Yeah, it's a very good question what you're asking. You have to educate the caregivers. You have to give the education to the caregivers about how they are going to deteriorate and what to expect from this treatment. At the same time, you have to tell the same thing to the patient, but you have to give the ball to his court. More you be active, more you can have a better longevity of life. And what I will say is, you can adopt a model where you educate the caregivers separately, giving due respect to the mood fluctuations and what are all the cognitive problems the patients are facing. All these you have to tell to the patients attenders, because most often or not they'll come and complain you, sir, he always sits in a corner, he don't come and mingle with kids. When the kids go and play to him, he says, no, 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 don't come and disturb me. So they will go and scold the patient. Why are you doing like this? The kids are coming to play with you. You're not encouraging them. But actually, this is the problem of their autonomic nervous system and the cholinergic activity. They'll get depressed and they'll isolate themselves. So the family members should find ways to employ them or involve them into familial activities, give more value to their thoughts, give more value to their position in the family, and encourage them to participate and hear on. Should not scold them and isolate them even more. Okay, so the education should go to the caregivers also. This is a fantastic question what you have asked, which I have really missed out. So educating the caregivers is very essential. More than any other conditions in this Parkinson's, it is very essential.
Thank you so much, sir.
Can we check
Yes.
balance and coordination in Parkinson's?
Can we
Yes.
check balance and coordination? Most often coordination will not be a problem. So if there is a cerebellar involvement in the later stages of Parkinsonism, when cerebellum also gets involved, from the basal ganglia to the cerebellum will be affected. So the patients will show some signs of cerebellar activity like incoordination and ataxic activity. But the basal ganglia's problem will superimpose on this thing, so it will prevent it. So I normally don't advise people to assess for coordination, because coordination is not a problem. Here the problem is the movement rate, the velocity of movement is the problem. That's why I told you we have to know about what is motor control and what are the problems in motor control. Here the control problem is slowness of movement and slowness of reaction. So these things is what I'll ask you. Balance, definitely you have to train. Balance you have to assess and you have to train. You have to train for static and dynamic balance in both sitting, standing, and also in kneeling postures. Because in Indian society, if you see, most of the patients, old age patient, they lie down on the ground. That too in rural area. So when you say that I have improved bed mobility of the patient, sit to stand for the patient, from which position you have done? Have you done it from the ground level, from the floor lying to sitting, floor lying to standing? So all these things are very essential. So balance, some of them adopt kneeling when they are getting up from the ground. Have you seen? So balance during kneeling is also very essential. So if the I'll assess the strategy of the patient, and I'll assess his functional activities. What are the facilities available in his home? If he's not having a cot and he's lying down on the ground, I'll definitely assess for balance in kneeling also. And balance in all positions is very essential.
Sir, what is the management of the Parkinson patient with the postural abnormality? There is a stooping posture that is very difficult to maintain balance.
Yeah. So as far as posture is concerned, as a physiotherapist now, the approach for posture is slowly changing. We normally say you have to sit erect, you have to maintain the plumb line, all these things, but that strategy is going away from the education. What normally is a normal posture, there is nothing called as a normal posture for anybody. It is an optimal posture. What is an optimal posture? A posture from which your work efficiency is maximal and you're able to maintain for a long time. Normally what we say, slouch sitting like this will put a lot of trouble on your lumbar spine. So you don't adopt this slouch sitting. Am I right or not? But when you
Yes, sir.
sit erect, how long you will be able to sit erect? How will be your operating system? Will you be able to deliver this speech? If you ask me to sit erect and deliver this speech, I won't be able to do, because that is not my convenient position. That is not my optimal posture. But if I slightly lean like this and if I talk, I can talk for hours together. So this is my optimal posture in which I am able to do. But don't be in one posture for a longer period of time. Try to change the posture often. That is what we normally educate to software workers now. That plumb line, maintaining this tragus line, maintaining it in erect 90 degree posture, that is not practically possible. The rehabilitation has become very practical nowadays. Don't tell patients whatever you are not practicing. First of all, as a physiotherapist, you cannot sit erect, you cannot maintain the shoulder levels in this normal posture for a longer
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, sir.
So be more practical. Which are all possible, give advice to the patients. Now again, if you see, you will sound very usual if you say that you have to sit erect, the monitor should be at the eye level, your hands should be on the ground. In an occupational area, you may not know that sometimes your HOD will come and stand near you. So at that time, you have to slightly sit on the edge of the couch, edge of the chair. When my teacher comes, I cannot sit relaxed like this. I have to sit on the edge of this. So all these things you have to train. Don't maintain a posture for a longer period of time. Try to change the posture. And this forward stoop posture and forward concave posture can be avoided by means of doing trunk extension and shoulder extension exercises. And the changes that are happening because of rigidity, you cannot avoid. You can postpone, but you cannot avoid. But see to that these postures do not affect the patient's postural strategies. As a physiotherapist, I will not be worried about the posture of the patient. I will be worried about the postural strategies, how his postural strategies are being affected and how it results in fall. That is what my concern will be. And as far as the forward stoop posture and this question mark posture is concerned, if that is going to affect the respiratory muscles, then that is a problem. If that is not going to affect the respiratory muscles, then let it be. How the grandfathers and grandmothers look, they normally look like that because these changes is going to happen over a period of time, that they're going to go for a curved posture. You cannot stop it. But the function is what essential. That is what is functional approach. Even if they are maintaining this forward stoop posture and doing their functions properly, I don't mind, let them stoop forwards. Am I clear, sir?
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you,
yes.
sir.
Yeah.
Another one more question. Sir, what is the time we can expect for a patient of Parkinson's to get improved functional activity?
It's a this question cannot be directly answered unless otherwise we find the patient with us. It takes time. I can tell you this thing, it will take more time compared to a stroke patient or age-related normal, because their learning activity is going to be affected. So again, this word normal is not correct word here, because functional normalcy means what? Pre-morbid status, how he was 10 years before. You cannot bring that. You have to optimize his function. Whatever is possible, step by step, you have to try to accomplish it. There are a lot of depending factors on this: how far the motivation of the patient, how far the family is associated and giving encouragement, how far you are spending time with the patient, how is his memory. All depends upon which stage the patient is in Hohmann Yahr scale. More is better. We cannot generalize as such how far it will take for the patient to normalize.
Okay, I hope Ankush Sharma is convinced. The next question is from Vaishnavi. What about gait in Parkinson's disease? And you can add another one more question also from Zainab. As in Parkinson, the disease become worsened over day. How can we deal with it?
First, the gait and postural strategies, I don't see them separately. They both are intermingled. The gait is a problem because the patient has a festinating type of gait where their step length is reduced, and they will always have a forward posture when they are running, walking. That means their line of gravity is going to fall front of the body. Okay, so apart from this, they will have propulsive fall. That is, they will fall forwards most of the time. So retropulsive fall means they will fall backwards. Most often they won't have a fall back. They will always have a propulsive fall. That's why we ask physiotherapists to always to stand in front of the patients when they are walking. Gait has to improve. As I told you that there are various strategies in improving the gait. As far my knowledge is concerned, if I can increase the step length of the patient, that is the first big achievement I am doing. At least if I can increase the step length by around say 20 to 30% of what is existing at present, then that's a great success in Parkinson patient. So you have to assess the gait first and find out what are the problems, and based upon the problem, you have to devise your treatment. Step length will always be a major issue. And then once you ask the patient to stop in a place, they cannot stop. They'll stop after some time. So that is the reaction time is very essential. So what you can give is, you can ask the patient that you can on the floor you can mark ABCDs in a zigzag manner. Ask him to walk in the zigzag manner, reach the target. Or you can ask the patient to go into the kitchen, take a U-turn, come and go to the toilet, sit on the toilet, get up and come back, mimicking his day-to-day activities. So that is going to improve his function. But always have a realistic goal. Don't expect the patients to do normal activity immediately, or even after a long time also, don't expect him to become almost normal. Whatever his abilities are, he will do that. Okay, this is about the gait. And the next question was about
As in
how,
Parkinson, the disease become worsen day over day. How can
yeah,
we deal with it?
yeah, it
So
it
what
will
can
not,
we do to manage the
yeah,
rigidity on the
yeah,
same
yeah,
person?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, I showed you the last slide. In that last slide, I showed you that exercise is going to increase the neurotropic activity. That means the neurotransmitters are going to become normal more the patient does exercise. I would like to tell you an study which was done in 2000. 1 month of training to Parkinson patient. Sorry, I don't have the reference. If needed, I will produce a reference later on. They have given 1 month of training and found out the physical function, particularly the neurotropic function, after 1 month in rats. The rats did not show any significant results. After 2 months also, they did not show significant result. But after 3 months of continuous training of 5 days per week and 2 hours per day training, these rats have shown a significant change in the drop down of the neurotropic activity. So that means what? You have to give a sustained exercise program, a prolonged exercise program per day, that is 2 hours per day for at least 5 days in a week, and you have to give it for 3 months. So then you can show the neurotropic activity has reduced significantly. So exercise is going to help the patient of time. Why? Because the role of neurologist is very limited here. The dopaminergic medicines what he is giving, maximum patients will have levodopa or some dopaminergic medicines, or sometimes they'll give steroids. That's it. That's what they can do. This is going to influence only the dopamine, not the cholinergic or the GABA or the serotonin or melatonin. But only thing that can attest to all these neurotransmitters is exercise. Okay, exercise is the best treatment for these patients. So more you give exercise, more frequently you are spending time with the patient, prolonged exercises are given to these patients, this drop down is going to come down. They are going to enjoy a very good quality of life for a longer period of time. But you cannot stop the progression from happening.
Okay, thank
One
you.
technique also
The
there
next,
which reduce the
yeah, the next
TDCS,
question is,
transcranial can also adopt transcranial direct current stimulation as a physiotherapist for increasing the neurotropic activity.
okay, thank you. The
Yes, sir.
next question is, can we prefer cardiorespiratory training?
I won't say cardio. You can say respiratory training. Yes, you have to give respiratory training for patients.
Okay, then next question is, how can we treat tremor by physiotherapy perspective?
As I told you at the start, you need not treat the tremor. Tremor is not a problem for me. because it's a resting tremor. Patients are going to have this tremor at resting point only. When they start moving, this tremor is going to disappear, and it is not going to interfere with my functional activity. So I don't mind about the tremors, and in fact, the presence of tremor will warm up the muscles. It helps the patient in moving.
That's good. Okay. And the another question is from Dr. Vikas Jha. And this question, I also faced it. What is your words to convince patients to get physiotherapy, as it will help them in day-to-day life, as well quality of life?
Convince the patient for going to physiotherapy, sir? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. It's always education is what more important is. In our clinic, if you see patients who are coming with pain, we educate them for 15 to 20 minutes. We tell them what is pain, how pain is also an emotion, how emotion is attached with pain, how to remove this emotion from pain, and we are seeing significant result. So it is up to the therapist to sit and counsel the patient, or you have. That's why I said you have to be a part of a team. You have counselors, neuropsychologists are there. So these neuropsychologists, they will make these patients understand in a proper way what is a need for their lifestyle now. They will not only counsel the patient, but they'll also counsel the caretakers. Most often are not, the financial issues are the major things in management of Parkinson patient when they are going to have a long-term physiotherapy. So that has to be overcome. Financial crisis is the one which we cannot attest very easily by counseling. You give hours of counseling, finally the patient says, I don't have money, what you're going to do? We can't also help. Again, the patient can't also help. Apart from financial situations, any other situations can be overcome by means of neuropsychological counseling.
Yes, okay, thank you. Any other questions, participants, please? Otherwise, we will end the session. I think we can end the session. Okay,
Yes,
if
sir.
anybody is having any doubt, they can WhatsApp to us. We will get back to you with the answers. Okay. And thank you, Dr. Arnachalam. Thank you for sharing your experience, especially about the importance of physical examination. And thank you for sharing the knowledge regarding ICF classification, importance of sleeping, proprioception and tactile sensory loss. And it was like a punch dialogue, use it or lose it. It was
Yes.
nice. Okay, and how tremor ends up with the warmness in patients. So you have given a lot of knowledge to all the participants. Hope it will be useful for them when they are treating the Parkinson's patient. Hope at least they will consider the points which we have shared through this webinar. And thanks to Dr. Rupesh for hosting, and thanks to Dr. Duna Saha for hosting this. And thank you all the participants for cooperation and being patient till the end. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.